Hello everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We've reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody. Now, I just got back from vacation, and while I was on vacation, I kind of had the chance to go back and rewatch a few of my old favorite films that I hadn't watched in a really long time, and that's kind of how we got to today's episode. I wanted to share a couple of films from a subgenre that I really, really love. So, anyway, I have always enjoyed crime and caper genre films. I really have from very early on. I mean, and most of us have heard of some biggies in that particular category. Say, like The Sting or Ocean's 11, whether you're talking about the original with Dean Martin or if you're talking about the remake, which I actually think was a better made film. I mean, Soderbergh just did such a good job with that one anyway, but that's beside the point. And those films really sort of focus on the camaraderie of the crew. Those two, of course, are really looking at sort of the criminal aspect of the films, but you could say the same for even films like The Untouchables, where it's still about that brotherhood, where you band together for this common goal, and that's a really common thread in that particular genre. But I actually love even more than that the subgenre where we're looking at kind of the screwball rom-com tone to things, and they're just a couple of classics that are really, really brilliantly done and kind of exemplify that style of film, but also a couple of really rather modern movies that are, I think, very much tonally throwbacks to those sort of exemplary movies. And those are what we're going to be talking about today. As always, these films are available entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card. So without any further ado, let's get to the Rex. Okay, the first film I want to talk about is available on DVD via our CleveNet service, and it's actually the movie that kind of caused me to fall in love with this particular subgenre, and that is 1966's How to Steal a Million. This movie is so, so delightful and so enjoyable. I had seen The Sting. I had seen the original Ocean's 11. I'd seen so many other crime and caper films, and I loved them. I really thought they were fantastic. I didn't think that anything could top that for me. And then my grandfather, I remember, said, hey, have you ever seen this? It was on VHS. That's how long ago this was. And I was like, no, I don't know what this is. But I did know who Audrey Hepburn was. Even as a small kid, I knew who Audrey Hepburn was. So I remember popping it in and just being so enthralled by the charm of the film and everything about it. So How to Steal a Million is a 1960s film, and boy, does it feel like it. I really do love that particular era of filmmaking in general, but everything about this film screams 1960s. It's directed by William Wyler and stars Audrey Hepburn, as I mentioned, but also Peter O'Toole and Eli Wallach, along with a number of other really famous character actors. And this cast just has such good chemistry. I, of course, adore Audrey Hepburn, but Peter O'Toole is just one of those British actors who's just so charming. I don't know that there's anyone today that I feel has that same vibe. I mean, there were a ton of those actors in that sort of like a group of British performers who there's just something about them that I don't think has a correlation in contemporary performance. It's not that contemporary British film isn't phenomenal. It totally is. It's just there's a very different vibe. Like I said, so 1960s. And then Eli Wallach is just Eli Wallach. I love him. Whether he's chewing scenery in some as a ridiculous villain in a spaghetti western, or he's playing some eccentric millionaire, I don't care. I always enjoy him. Anyway, this film was set in Paris, it's filmed in Paris, and it screams Paris, along with Audrey Hepburn's phenomenal wardrobe, which is all done by Givenchy. It's just a beautiful looking film in addition to everything else. But just so you have a little bit of background, um, with How to Steal a Million, we are dealing with this rather eccentric, incredibly wealthy art collector and expert. His name is Charles Bonnet. He is well known by the entire art community. He's got a reputation that cannot be beat. But what the world doesn't know is that this reputation is built on forging masterpieces and then selling them at a massive profit. That's how his family has always managed to amass a fortune. And you will frequently sell them in different generations so that it can't really necessarily be traced. And especially in those early years of the family, we know there wasn't really a science to kind of date all of this stuff. And the idea is that these people are trained so well that you can't tell that they're not, the real artist. These pieces even take from like dirt and things like that. I mean, it's a really quite well thought out scheme. I loved learning about it while the movie was going on. I just thought, oh, that's very clever. Except Bonet kind of seems to have maybe an overinflated feeling of just how secure and safe he is. He decides to donate this replication of a prized, incredibly famous sculpture to a Paris museum. The problem is that the world has now developed a science that can date the materials that the sculpture is made of, which is, of course, going to be an issue. When they actually, in order to get insurance for this piece, they have to do this testing. And Bonet isn't really thinking about it, so he agrees, oh yeah, sure, that's fine, why not? And it's his daughter, Nicole, played by Audrey Hepburn, who's like, that's going to be an issue. So if this sculpture is found to be a forgery, suddenly everything is in question, And she does not want to see her family's reputation go up in flames. And I should say that it's not that Hepburn has been like advocating for this like forger's lifestyle. She is not a forger. She's got her own thing, but she still doesn't want to see everything implode, which is exactly what would happen. So Nicole ends up running into this guy, Simon Dermot, who she thinks is a master thief. And it is such a ridiculous, I mean, like, this is prime screwball comedy. It's a bit of a mistaken identity situation, but not at the same time. She decides to hire Simon, who she thinks is a cat burglar, to steal back the sculpture from the museum. And things just snowball from there. And it is so delightfully ridiculous that even if you have to suspend your belief for certain elements, and I don't, especially the first handful of times I've watched it, because I have watched it many, many times, I don't think I ever was like, well, that's not realistic. I mean, I feel like this all feels a bit 1960s fever dreamy from the get-go anyway, so you're already in that state where anything goes. And if you just sort of let that lie, it's so entertaining. I mean, really, like the little caper bits the little things that Simon figures out how to do in order to get the next step further with fooling museum security and everything. It's just so good. And then the big reveal, of course, about this cat burglar. It's just delightful. Seriously, it's just so much fun. So if you're looking for something with an incredible production design, because like I said, everything from the costumes to the sets to just all of it, production design, A++, chef's kiss, all the good things, really phenomenal acting and exceptional chemistry. I wish Audrey Hepburn and Peter O'Toole had been in more films together. They're great pairings, like Cary Grant and Hepburn, Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, all of these people who were in multiple movies together because people enjoyed seeing them. I would have loved to see more from these two. I really, really would have. I think that they play off of one another's personalities incredibly well. I also think they have like this rhythm that works incredibly well that not all pairings do have. Um, and maybe that's in part the direction. Wyler had worked with Hepburn a couple times before. He directed Roman Holiday, as well as The Children's Hour. And both of those films have such different tones, and yet he's able to pull incredible performances from Hepburn for both. So you know he's got skills as far as direction goes. So it's just this confluence of incredible events and circumstances that make this movie just an absolute must watch. So if you are at all interested in like the rom-com subgenre of crime and caper films, this is where you start. How to Steal a Million, again, available on DVD via our CleveNet service. Okay, so for years and years and years, I have tried to find a film that I feel has a similar vibe to How to Steal a Million, but I just had no success. You know, and at a certain point I just sort of gave up. I figured this is a once in a lifetime kind of movie, and that's totally fine. I can just rewatch this movie. But then I found my second pick, and while it's definitely a vastly different film, there's something about it that really reminds me of How to Steal a Million. This one is available for stream via our Hoopla service, and that is 2010's Wild Target. So, you know, this film is 40 years from How to Steal a Million, but there's something about it that seems really familiar. Wild Target is definitely a black comedy. It's directed by Jonathan Lynn, and it stars Bill Nighy, Emily Blunt, Rupert Grint, Eileen Atkins, Martin Freeman, and Rupert Everett. That is a ridiculous cast, let me just say right up there. And it's actually based on a 1993 French film, and I think that's probably where I get a very similar vibe. It's a super English movie, and everybody in it is incredibly British, but it feels really French. Like there's a tone about it, and something about the performance style feels very French. So again, maybe I'm feeling a bit of that commonality, but outside of that, it's quite a different film. So we are following Victor, who is an incredibly successful, well respected assassin. Victor is played by Bill Nighy, of all people. And I think that is sort of perfect casting, primarily because you're really looking for someone who doesn't stick out. And Bill Nighy plays that kind of everyman to a T. He really is kind of perfect casting for this. Victor, even through all his success, is sort of under the thumb of his mother. He comes from a long line, it seems, of assassins. And, you know, it's very clear from early on he has a very regimented way of living. And that's been sort of like pounded into him from the very get-go. He has an assignment where he's supposed to murder this lovely young woman, but as he's sort of learning her routine and following her, he kind of ends up falling in love with her, or at least the idea of her. That woman is played by Emily Blunt, who wouldn't fall in love with her, and things just kind of snowball from there. You've got this man who's been assigned to kill this woman, and instead he falls in love, and she definitely doesn't know what's really going on for quite some time with this guy who's just suddenly there and kind of following her around. And on top of that, you have Rupert Grint playing this young man who mistakes Victor for a private detective. The young man ends up kind of being his apprentice, and he just adds another layer of like absolute ridiculousness to all of this weird, twisty plot. And that, of course, is played by Rupert Grint. If you aren't familiar, Rupert Grint played Ron Weasley in the Harry Potter movies, but this is very much like a different kind of character, though I suppose he is kind of bumbling and ridiculous in this too, but I digress. The chemistry between these three, so good. Like he and Rupert Grint and Emily Blunt have hardcore sibling vibes. Like they bicker constantly, and like it's pretty funny. Um, but Bill Nighy and Emily Blunt really do have this strange, incredibly charming chemistry together that I feel is very similar to the chemistry we got between Audrey Hepburn and Peter O'Toole as well. And it's the little things that make this so enjoyable for me to watch. Um, you have a ton of little like quirky subplots going on, but then you have this overarching plot that goes between Nighy's character and Blunt's character, where at one point, even though he was supposed to kill her, he's now desperate to try and keep her alive. Because, of course, once he fails to complete his mission, other people are sent to take care of the job in his stead. So it's just a lot of fun. And Nighy is not an actor you would picture being in that kind of a role, even though he's perfectly cast. So that was a lot of fun to see that, how that unfolded. As mentioned, it's not exactly the same kind of movie that How to Steal a Million is. And I will be super upfront. This is not a movie that I would rate as highly as it either, but I still find this one super enjoyable. Wild Target is a film that was not on my radar at all, and I just watched it because it ended up being on Hoopla, like really, and I saw the cast and I was like, I love all those actors. Eileen Atkins is hilarious. She's a very small role as Victor's mother, and it doesn't matter how small that role is, she like owns it. She's just so marvelous in this. But yeah, everybody in the cast is so good at what they're given. It doesn't matter how tiny the role, they just sort of like, embody that character in a way that is super memorable. Whether we're talking about Atkins or Martin Freeman, he was Watson in the Sherlock Holmes TV series with Benedict Cumberbatch. He plays a rival assassin and is just hilarious in his sort of smarmy, bumbling nature. He's just great in that particular role, partly because you just don't expect him to be that character either, because Freeman never plays those kinds of guys. Anyway, if you are looking for something quite dark, because it does get pretty dark, but also hilarious and somewhat romantic, Wild Target is really such a good pick. It's so, off the beaten path enough that like, if you haven't seen it, like you won't have too many spoilers about what all happens at the end, and I think you'll really, really have such a good time with it because there are so many twists and turns and surprises. So again, available on our Hoopla service, 2010's Wild Target. It's total must watch. Okay, so that was our episode for today. If you have any recommendations for, kind of screwball comedy, rom-com style crime and caper films, please comment with those below. I am very much hoping to hear from people because I am always looking for more movies in this particular subgenre. If you have any recommendations for themes you'd like to see us cover in the future, comment with those too. Definitely always looking for help coming up with new themes. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I love putting these little recommendation lists together, and this week in particular was such a lot of fun. I really do love these two movies. And with that, I'm going to close things out. Once more, thank you for joining us, and hopefully I will see you next week. Bye-bye!